No decade in this American century has been more analyzed than the 1960s. 30 years ago, photographer Richard Avedon and writer Doon Arbus set out to capture the times with images and interviews. They chose celebrities and everyday people, activists and victims. But it took the passage of time to add perspective to their project. They're now presenting their work in a book of pictures and words called The Sixties. Joining me now to talk about this project and this era, photographer Richard Avedon and writer Doon Arbus, and I am very pleased to have them here. Welcome. How long?
Hi.
Hi. Good. Great to see you. I said to Doon coming in, what a great way to sit, you know, and that's just sort of the way if I wasn't so big, I'd sit at this table. Is that the way you sit normally? That's the most comfortable way to sit? Good for you. How long have you two?
Well, we've known each other for many years, but we started working together in 64?
Yeah.
Something around that.
Yeah.
And the idea was to do what?
At that time, I was beginning to work on the civil rights movement. I had finished, just starting to work again. No, I'd actually started the civil rights movement. But I wanted a new body of work, and the 60s were happening, and I needed someone to work with me. And we had a very kind of, what would you call it, loose idea about a book.
I thought it wasn't really, so it was going to be a book and an exhibition, probably.
Right.
And,
Text supplied by you, pictures by Dick.
Interviews, yeah, text by me in the sense that I interviewed the people
Right.
and edited the interview.
Right.
So there were these kind of monologues and photographs,
Right.
which at the time we sort of pasted together, and we'd carry around these cards and, you know, to the next person and say, see what we're doing, you know, here's so-and-so, and there would be their photograph, and then you turn it over, and there would be their interview.
But it was like a bunch of tarot cards. It meant nothing. It had no structure. It had no plan. It was just a book that might happen, and it didn't happen.
And it didn't happen then?
No.
Yeah. And it does happen now?
Yeah.
Yeah. But how did you go about deciding, you know, the old question of who?
In the book?
Yeah.
Or
who are you going to take photographs of?
Then?
Yeah.
Followed my enthusiasms, followed Doon's. We sort of, the time was so electric. Everyone had something to say, as opposed to now. They were proud of what they were saying. There were serious things going on in the country. The civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the passions were so necessary in a way. And it's the first time that there was a sort of theater of politics, a theater of revolt, that people were using themselves for the first time to present their views.
Right.
And what Doon is so good at was that underneath the public view was the private view. When Janis Joplin says, I have a kind of loneliness.
Yeah.
It's not about the 60s, but she represented the 60s.
Yeah. She also said meeting somebody and balling them means something, but it doesn't mean nearly as much as it used to than September of 1969. These are rather extraordinary photographs, and I want to show them as we talk about this. But was there a sort of gravitas about this, somehow you're out to record a decade, or was it more a sense of, look, these are interesting times, let's just sort of get out there and see what's happening?
No, I think there was a gravitas, for sure, but not so much about recording the times as it was about the people, I think, and their impact on the times and the times' impact on them. So it wasn't really intended as a portrait of a decade that was going to be a legendary decade. I think it was to in some way keep track of what these people were doing.
Yeah. When you look back now, because you've been a part of every decade in an interesting way, and someone once said that Avedon, whether it's civil rights or whether it's Vietnam or whether it's the 60s or whether it's this or that, somehow always seems to be there with his camera. When you look back, was the 60s unique and special and different?
Yes, I think it was a special decade in the whole century.
I mean, you can say that now as we end this century,
Yeah,
that the
that's right.
60s stood for something different.
That's right. It was, revolution is a word I don't use because it's not about a revolution in America, but it was about a time when everyone had something real and serious to fight against the establishment, and whatever happened to it, it changed the way marriages are, the way people think of the government, and it was a very alive time, and a very, what was offered the camera, in a way, was wonderful.
And I was part of the 60s, obviously, but I didn't, I mean, you had a sense that it would go on and ever. You never thought, well, this is something that's going to be here for a while and then it's going to pass on. I mean, because I was in college in the 60s, or throughout the 60s.
Yeah.
And the sense was it's just going to be like it is forever.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. It was different. It did change.
It changed.
I mean, it changed because of Vietnam, and it changed because of...
Well, no, the 60s were part of Vietnam, but it changed, yes.
No, but Watergate changed things.
It changed again. Watergate, that's right.
The aftermath of Watergate changed things.
The failure of communism. And,
This cover, tell me about the cover before we look at some pictures here.
Well, John Lennon, that represented the op-ed, psychedelic, Ringo, the peace movement, Paul, the flower power, and Harrison, the religious, Eastern religion. Yeah. And then each one became symbolic of that period, and these four pictures are still good.
Yeah. Before we look at these photographs, because you've been associated with him, tell me what an Avedon portrait is about. What's different about an Avedon?
I don't know that I should be answering this question.
Just personally, what do you see when you see his versus?
Well, I don't know that I would lump them all together in a pile. I think I suppose I think that there's a particular kind of tension and consciousness of being there for the camera. In a way, all portrait photographs are about that. Mm-hmm. But they're about that in relation to the person who's taking the picture. I mean, that's the invisible presence that's ingrained in the photograph, the person who you don't see, who's there, which is the photographer. And I think that there's a kind of, you can sort of read a personality through its absence in a bunch of photographs. And
Picasso said about portraiture that it was as much about the painter and more than it was the sitter, the person.
Yeah, but I think when you're a painter, it's absolutely true. But photographer needs a collaboration with the sitter. It's something, I can't do a portrait of you that isn't dependent on you. Right. And that makes it miraculous and wonderful. This thing of this moment when we're together and you have a certain trust in me or not, and I'm photographing that, and so the collaborative sense. And of course, every portrait photographer brings something else to the sitter. Mm-hmm. And I can't define what I know that I follow my enthusiasms. Yeah. I know that I was against the war. I was against the situation, the civil rights situation in the South, and I went there. But when I got there, what happened between myself and, say, the Mission Council in Vietnam or the napalm victims was a momentary thing, and the way I see portraiture, the way I see pictures, I don't want the style of the photographer. I know there's a lot, I'm not doing this very well, but I know that Victorian photography, composition that shows, lighting that shows, and you say, oh, look at how they lit him. Yeah. Look at how the composition of his cigarette is, to me, fights the sense that the people just emerged, and I wasn't there. But of course I was. Right.
Let me take a look, and we'll talk about some of this. I wanted to say that before we saw these. There is Twiggy.
Mm-hmm. To me now, it looks like an image for the French Revolution. And that's why we started the book. I mean, she looks like she's leading the world into battle. But I was, at the time that I did it, I was interested in the shape around her little face. Right.
What do we say about, did you interview her?
No.
No.
No. All right. Next picture. this is Peter J. and this is Alvin Schuster,
Right.
and this is John Larson, and here's Kevin Buckley, who was just on this program not long ago talking about Vietnam. Yeah. And then you turn the page, and there is Gloria Emerson, New York Times correspondent, with Dennis Cameron, a photojournalist and an interpreter. And it just...
And the texts from Gloria are so moving about her being a New York Times correspondent and going down the street and saying, "Father, forgive. We don't know," etc.
Yeah, tell me about this photograph.
Well, in the period that I worked in Vietnam, about 7 weeks, I wanted to do some of the napalm victims, and I did. It was tough photographs.
It is a tough photograph. Yeah. Let me go back to some of the cultural figures of the time, and we look at that Janice, and here you have Allen Ginsberg and Peter Orlovsky.
Well, you know, kissing was a political act. Two guys kissing, getting undressed, getting naked was a political act. It wasn't narcissistic. It was like saying, "Here I am. This is what my life is about." And
this is me.
This is me. Yeah. And you know what you can
jump
do
in here.
Yeah, that's right. It was hard to keep the clothes on anybody.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I want to come back to this one. Richard Hughes with the Vietnamese Street Boys. There is Richard Hughes, who's also been on this program talking about.
Yeah, he's a wonderful guy who tried so hard to help these street kids who had no families, no future, and give them a place to sleep. And I would go into parts of Saigon that were very dangerous, alone with my camera, and there was a lot of racism, black and white, in the Army, and there were black bars and white bars, and I would drift into the black neighborhoods, black bars, and I'd go in and come out of a bar, and I'd look, and there'd be 5 little kids just following me around. They were my guards, and that was arranged by Dick Hughes. And wherever I went with my camera, I look around and I see these little tough kids ready to save me.
Making sure you're there. Just take a look at this for a moment while we're still on Vietnam. A young Henry Kissinger.
That was done at the time that I did something called The Family for Rolling Stone. And it was all about the power elite of the country. And I just let the people photograph themselves. I didn't feel it was too easy a shot to shift myself with lack of knowledge toward the right or to the left. So the pictures were just taken by themselves.
Now, what do you say to them when you're doing that?
Well, he said, he came into the room, he had 5 minutes, he said, "Be kind to me." So I was so stunned, I didn't know I knew, I'm not so dumb, I knew what he meant by being kind, and I knew what I meant by being kind. So I simply I didn't say anything. In that case, in the case of many of those portraits of political figures, I just left them alone. And their ties were interesting, their stances were interesting, the right-wing stiff upper lips were interesting, and it was so revealing, as opposed to a heartfelt pursuit.
Yeah. Back to cultural, the next one is William Casby, former slave, Algiers. Tell me about this wonderful picture.
Well, I went to Louisiana.
This is what it looks like in the book.
Yeah, it's a beautiful man. He was born in slavery, brought here, and we tried to find out for the end of this book, have biographies of everyone. We couldn't reach anyone who knew anything about the Casbys. But at the time of the sitting, he said, my greats, and he had a town full of grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and now it's all wiped out. You can't find them. But he's a wonderful man. He was taking care of his wife. They were both 100.
Did anybody record? Were stories passed from generation to generation? Did anybody record?
He should have been the most recordable, and we tried to locate him and couldn't. Or members of the family in that town.
We're going to see in a minute Malcolm X.
Yep.
Interesting. Here is the photograph in which you blurred it
deliberately to give a sense of the emotional fraughtness of the moment.
Did you ever hear from him about the photograph?
No.
He was shot down in Harlem. This is Martin Luther King and his father. It is
his father and his son.
His son.
So there are 3 kings: the third, the second, and the first. Yeah. And again, it was one of those very quick sittings. He had a moment to pose, and it's the best I could do.
It's pretty good. This is obviously Paul Simon and partner.
Garfunkel.
Garfunkel, right there.
That was interesting. I was doing a cover for a Columbia record, and I said, could we try something that doesn't look like photography? May I just photograph you walking around and being around? And I did this for an hour, and they were very good. And then they said, well, how about one of your famous pictures against a gray background? I said, okay. And, of course, that was the cover. And this is the first time that's been...
This is a remarkable book. As Dick Avedon, as everybody knows, is one of our best recorders of our time through the lens of his camera, and I'm always pleased to have him here. He's going to come back, and we're going to sit down and talk about a life. I mean, from high school with James Baldwin to the Merchant Marines to coming to New York to an association with the Harper's Bazaar to being at the right place, or being at the place where things were happening and capturing in film with his camera the times. We'll talk about that. Doon Arbus provides in this book a text of the times and provides a connection, a tissue that somehow makes these even more impressive. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.